Hi Chris, hi Chetan, welcome. You've recently both been to Dreamforce and then afterwards also the world tour around Agentforce in Berlin and the enablement session in Munich. And of course, and also on top of that, all the webinars and all the other meetings, the upskill shirts, etc. Can you tell us more about your experience so far with Agentforce and what you think about it?
Cool. Thank you for having us. Maybe in first, let us introduce you. My name is Christopher. I'm the Salesforce CTO in Germany for Capgemini, and I'm a Salesforce CTA, and I'm glad that Chetan joined alongside me here in that session.
Hi, I'm Chetan. I am CX Architects Lead and a Salesforce CTA, working alongside Christopher at Capgemini. And yeah, happy to talk about whatever impressions we have about Agentforce and whatever conversations we are having with our customers regarding Agentforce.
Cool. So maybe to bring everybody on the page, what we've learned and took away from Dreamforce actually. So I mean, fairly speaking, as always, when you're being a Dreamforce, there's a lot of buzz. Salesforce and their marketing department is generating through their new products and their announcements. And if you look back at the last years, then the buzz hype was even higher than what the real product were announced. And also this year in the first place it was like, okay, they have something new, which is called Agentforce. How will that be? Is that really something fancy, or is it just like another rebranding of like, for example, Copilot? But after already like the keynote and the first demo, it looked quite promising. And the reason is like how Salesforce really envisioned their product. So if you're thinking about like how was like all that kind of co-piloting, which is also like, even if you're looking back, still a kind of a new product and still evolving, you had to realize that there's some kind of human who's generating a prompt. So like a kind of a prompt engineer, and then you're throwing that against an LLM, and then sometimes even you have like some kind of RAG functionality to enrich the data or to enrich the prompt to be more precise, so that the LLM, the response is more accurate and maybe not corrupted with any kind of hallucination. And then you receive the output, and then the human needs to take action again. So this is like how a kind of an overall AI setup worked before. And obviously the adoption was like difficult, yeah. Everybody maybe in his daily life was like figuring out where it's probably useful and where it's just like just a waste of time, because like the output is like not that accurate as the system and how LLMs is, or how they are learning and how they are trained. So there's a lot of kind of uncertainty in that regards. It's like, is that really accurate, and is that really like time saving? Thinking also like all that kind of LinkedIn posts written by Copilot, they have more or less like the same look and feel, because it's like how LLMs actually working out. And now we're moving, and that's like the change Salesforce introduced, into more kind of an agentic flow, which means like that a kind of a reasoning framework comes into the picture. So Chetan will explain later on in a minute how Salesforce really envisioned that and what is like the benefit of it. But the ambition is on the Salesforce side to enrich like the whole system, to add more reasoning to it, to make it more behaving like humans, to make the response more accurate. And obviously as Salesforce and within their CM system, they're sitting on tons of data. And Mark Benioff is stressing it all the time. They're sitting also on the metadata, meaning they know, for example, like, okay, this is like a phone number field to make it simple, or this is like an email field, maybe like a simple example. But you can add way more context to it than like, for example, Microsoft or like OpenAI or any kind of other LLM provider. So this is like one of those unique selling points. And with that reasoning framework, obviously the ambition, what Salesforce is currently aiming for is like that the outcome they are producing is way more accurate, really can take over agentic exercises, tasks where I wouldn't say you can replace humans, but you can do kind of a shift and how you organize your workforce. And that's pretty interesting, especially if you have a deeper look how agents are currently working within the new Salesforce system. And it's like the first thing. We also Salesforce made it very, very simple to configure that. Most of you, I guess, which watched that kind of recording here, they already saw it in their LinkedIn timeline. Tons of like selfies created, like I built my first agent, I built the first agent, and they make it really accessible in that regards. Yeah. So you need to define in the first place a role. So what is like the job which needs to be done? Which kind of data they can access, and their Salesforce obviously is utilizing their whole underlying system in terms of like flows or even like Apex classes on Apex, which you can leverage to fetch data and work with that kind of data. And then you define already like the action. So what should an agent do? What kind of capabilities they have? And on the other hand, what are the kind of guardrails? So kind of instructions in terms of like how they should behave, and what shouldn't they do. So for example, like don't provide any kind of specific information in some kind of under some conditions and circumstances, and so on and so on. So you can provide certain guardrails. And last but not least, Salesforce has or serves already like brings the capability to expose those kind of agents in tons of various channels based on the existing framework. So and capabilities. So you're just adding those kind of or you have the possibility to phrase it in that way, to add those kind of channels, and that makes it really fits into like their current product landscape, and that's a benefit compared to potentially all other providers of like similar services, so like Agentforce, because it's like nested into the Salesforce ecosystem, which makes it so appealing, and why the buzz in the last 4 or 6 weeks after the Dreamforce really kicked off. And I guess, Chetan, you can explain a little bit more about your impression as you joined just this week a world tour. And the pictures I saw, there was like crowded house full of people, and everybody was interested and keen to talk about Agentforce.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like I mentioned, we had tons of conversations with our customers who, since the Dreamforce, have been buzzing with the information overload that they are getting from all over the world, not just from Salesforce, but like you mentioned about LinkedIn, like people posting their pictures about I built my first agent. Yeah, but talking about what is the real business behind it. So or from the things that people or our customers are telling us that they feel a value that an agent can bring for. Yeah, of course, starting from these kinds of service use cases, sales use cases. Yeah, but at the same time, there is a little bit of feeling that it's a fear of unknown kind of a thing, because there's a lot more buzz, but at the same time there's a lot new. And if anything is to go by what their previous experience was with the prompt builder, yeah, I mean it's way more easier and ready for ready for action, rather than how it was previously, where you had to do a lot more still DIY. I know it has been said before, but it actually was a lot of DIYing before to make it work. And then you had to think about very specific guardrails, where it can be done or utilized and where it cannot be utilized. But with an agentic framework that Salesforce is trying to do around it, it's helping customers imagine where do we need to bring those guardrails and make sure that it doesn't go out of scope or out of its own role or the actions that it's expected to do, over where it needs to be, not made overly restrictive. And maybe it's a lot more to do with the fact that now the customers are able to get the imagination with the AI, especially with the experience over the last months and years that they have had with ChatGPT and all the other Gen AI tools out there, versus something that just purely was black box and predictive AI that nobody was able to think about beyond one or two layers. And so, yeah, it's becoming a lot more democratized in that sense, that people are able to not just get, starry-eyed when they see the demos, but now they're also able to relate to quite a lot of those use cases and then think about, where and how to implement some of these things, and get some benefits out of it.
Yeah, I guess that's like the important aspect here, and the change Salesforce introduced in terms of like from a business perspective, you can way more have like the imagination, like the return of invest. You can take it from obviously two angles. So one is like from a pure, and obviously as we are in some hard economical times, thinking more from a kind of a cost reduction, purely cost reduction perspective. As well as on the other hand is like where I potentially can increase, for example, from a service point, and Salesforce started with the service agent, while they're seeing that it's way easier in terms of like the go-to-markets point. You can add a lot of benefits for the customer to increase the customer satisfaction, because they, based on what you explained, Chetan, is like people getting more and more used to it. Even like modern browsers already, like as part of like the search results, for example, if you're trying to Google and search for something up, they are providing AI capabilities. Apple with like the new iOS system is starting and kicking off certain things. So it's getting more and more natural into daily life. And I guess this is very important in terms of like the pure adoption of those kind of systems. And then obviously then from a business perspective, it's very easier to starting and thinking about where you can see then the return of invest, and also like the end user is, I guess, way more trying to use it, and it's way more appealing than maybe like 1.5, 2 years ago. So I wouldn't call my mother already like a kind of a prompt engineer, but she's getting used to it.
Yeah, I would also say so. Yeah, and especially given how people have I've spoke to quite a few customers who have had experience with implementing of CTI IVRs and chatbots as well, and they everybody had the same feeling about those things, like how brittle they were, like every single path in the branch, every single way you wanted to handle a conversation was so hardwired. If this, then give the customer these options: press one to do this, or press two to do this, and so on and so on. So everything was very brittle and pre-programmed to say so. And now it's something that is a lot more free-flowing conversation. It's a very natural language conversation back and forth, and then there is a lot more that you can express, and it's very first of all, it's not that pre-programmed or hardwired in one way or the other, that you have to do this when it is this input, and then give them these options and only these options, and so on and so on. But at the same time, it can also do some sort of like a small talk and some sort of like reasoning when to do what action and in which order, and when not to do any action because it's completely off the topic and that it can't handle.
But do you
Yeah, I
think
guess sorry, just I wanted to add, like, Chetan, obviously we all know that kind of game when you're trying to phone a kind of a company, and you end up in the IVR, and you just play the game, how you sneak in through the various options, and that you end up talking to a real person. And obviously having like a different kind of entry gate where you're providing maybe way more stuff in a way more detailed way, can change definitely the workflow.
but do you think that's mostly because of the reasoning engine in between, that it's really the orchestration where the flexibility is. Because, for instance, on this slide, we see that we still have to configure the data access. So where does it fetch its data from? Is it only from sales or also from other sources maybe? What are the actions that it can take based on the conversation, based on the decisions it makes? And then the guardrails. But should all those lists be comprehensive? Or let's say if you provide two guardrails that it can also understand, like, okay, based on this, you probably also don't want this behavior, that it can reason also on top of these parameters that you provide.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, we are now in terms of the evolution from LLMs. Now we are into the LAM, large action models, right? Where it can reason and it can, adapt based on its, learnings. So it is that part where, agentic capabilities are derived based on the fact that these language models can have the reasoning capabilities. And that's the part where, Agentforce is different from what we have seen in the past, where that interaction was only perhaps limited to generation of certain things, generation of a sales email or record summary or field enrichments and so on and so on. But here it's a lot more where it can do some autonomous actions based on very specific reasoning that it can do intelligently. And just to specifically talk about this Atlas reasoning engine, so I think this is where the part where it is doing something implicitly. It can based on the inputs, it can look at the description or the role or the scope that it has been defined to do. What topics does it touch, and then accordingly, what are the instructions around those topics that you talked about, the guardrails. And within those guardrails, it can then autonomously decide which actions does it have to take. Looking at some of the examples that I've seen from various different webinars and playing around with it a little bit, I do feel at times it's a little bit brittle, and there are times where you have to very categorically tell it, okay, you have to convert the date into this and this format. The output has to be in a JSON format. You have to do this and not to do this. And I think that's where the more people play around with it, the more people experience it, the more better they can get on it. Some of those things are very, very crucial, because it can make or break the use case that you're trying to solve with it, or it can just completely run away with the whole show without having any user even realize what it has managed to do in the background.
So what I'm taking from this also that the actions that you define as the initial configuration of the agents, as was shown on the previous slide, is more of a initial suggestion around which actions it can take, but over time, by interacting with the users, it will actually expand its own list of actions by reasoning on top of that. Is that correct understanding?
Well, when you create those agents, you define specific topics. And for each of those topics, you have a list of given actions that you've already predefined that it can take, those actions. I'm not really sure if there is anything on the where it can come up with its own actions, which was not defined as attached to a specific topic. What is the reasoning engine trying to do is first get understanding of, through the customer prompt or the intent, what topics does it touch? What topics are relevant when you're having this kind of a prompt or a conversation with the customer. And then accordingly look at, for each one of those topics, what are the actions assigned within those. So it can only act and take those actions, and not something that is not part of this overall scope of a specific topic that it has as a list of actions assigned to that topic.
Okay, so the list of actions does have to be comprehensive. Like all the actions that you want the agent to be able to take must be explicitly defined upfront.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's again one of those elements of your guardrails. You don't define an action or tie to it and say delete a record and expect the reasoning engine to be smart enough to know, okay, in which scenario does it have to be smart enough to delete and what with the others not. I would rather be a little bit more conservative in that sense and not define or not attach a delete action or something which is of massive repercussions as even an action assigned to a topic. In those cases, I would simply define it to do a handover to a human agent who we can trust and rely on to do a better job, rather than simply relying on an agent who can run away with the entire thing without even you realizing it.
Yeah, so it's
I
really
mean,
the reasoning then and the decision making around it and the orchestration where the advantage is. So compared to, for instance, with a chatbot, you also had to define all the actions explicitly and the guardrails, but the big difference there is that with the chatbot, you also have to define all the logic paths, like all the decision paths would then be a lot of if-else logic. And here you have the Atlas reasoning engine taking that over with actual reasoning instead of having that explicitly
Exactly.
defined.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to that point, let me show you something that I was trying to play around with, and maybe we can then talk more about it. So give me a hint if you can see my screen. All right. Okay, cool. So I think this is something that is whoever has done I built my first agent or any of the Agentforce webinars or trainings, you would have seen or you would have built this agent as part of your Trailheads access, right? So I was just trying to play around with it, and so from an agent, get access to what all. So this is that topic that Trailhead module tells you to do, and then associate these actions. So as you can see, so this is the topic, and these are the list of actions that are associated to it. So it can only act upon on these topic on reason, but it can in the end take any one of these actions based on the reasoning, and not do something which is not defined within the scope of a specific topic. And of course, just to understand what really is it trying to do as part of that reasoning. So I was just trying to play around with various different, inputs on it. So I gave it a prompt, tell me more about this very specific experience, as the experience on the Coral, what's it called? Yeah, Coral cloud results. And then it said, as part of the very clear instructions, if that you have to ask, if a customer is not known, you must always ask for this email address and their membership number to get their contact record by running the action get customer details before running any action. So yes, here you're explicitly first of all giving it a concrete instructions. You have to ask it, and then once you have those details, then you have to run these actions. Maybe here you're even making it a very clear pinpoint, crisp, in the sense like, okay, go done, do this once you have it. But then, just playing around with it, and I was just, okay, I did that prompt, but then instead of providing it the details, I just ask is, why do you need my details? Why do you need my email address? And that is where, based on this prompt, it did first of all, it selected the topic. Yes, it's still related to this topic. And then these are the 6 instructions, 6 very clear, crisp instructions explicitly provided to it. And the actions associated with that topic. However, now there is this reasoning part where it is saying, okay, look, the response correctly allows the context by asking the customer's emails. And based on that, it has come up with this message on its own, right? I need your email address and membership to verify the identity and access of your account details. So you can see, right, this is not very hardwired in terms of what response do you have to write back. If you were to think about it from chatbots or IVRs or something, you would have to very clearly give it a message, and that message is kind of hard coded in some way that you have to show to the customer as an explanation. Why do you want or something? Because here I'm clearly going off script. The customer is the bot. I asked a question and bot asked me for the details, or the agent asked me for the details, but then I went completely off topic. And this is the part that where it can resolve its own way to figure out which topic does it relate to, what reasoning do I have to do I have to do any grounding on top of it, and then based on that, what response do I have to show. So I gave it the email address, but not the ID. And then it said, no, I also need your membership ID. And this time I gave the membership ID, but then I also gave it the email address one more time. And then again, it was able to be parse through it and then get the details of the contact record saved within the system, input and output. And based on that, it was able to go get the execute that action, get the experience, and then provide me the details of what that experience is related to and so on, right? Again, another example of what I was trying to do going off script and trying to see how what ways does it see the actions and then the reasoning around that. And then I asked him, okay, thanks. Please tell me about Capgemini experience. It clearly knows it was able to respond information from the customer and does not provide any specific data. And so look, first of all, it's not doing any grounding on it, but it's trying to do a small talk. And then it's like, could you please provide me the exact name of the experience if you are interested in? Yeah, I just, instead of providing more details, another negative test scenario, you can call it, provided it something like this. This time it did execute and it did not find anything around that. And then it says like, could you please provide me the exact details? Yeah, so trying to do again those actions. This time it did. It didn't find anything. It looks like it doesn't have an experience with this name in our records. Could you please provide more details about something like this, right? Lastly, but then I just did this. And look what, this time I didn't even shortlist the topic of experience management, the one that we had created. It completely came up with a different, what topic does it have to execute? Of course, funny enough, it's called off topic. And then it says very clearly, the user request is off topic, never answer general questions, only respond to general greetings and blah, blah, blah. And this time, good. So that's the part that I'm talking about in terms of, it is able to reason out and then accordingly construct and reply based on that. It knows that this is not a topic, or this time it didn't even execute the request to go and check whether there is another experience called Capgemini.com. Rather, it knows that it's an off topic, and then therefore it doesn't even have to request, take any action on it.
And this is like two things which you also showcased here is, I guess, very important. First of all, is like obviously with all that kind of agents, we have like a kind of a new surface for that kind of attacks. So obviously what Chetan was trying to do here is like trying to bring the bot into like the agent into like a situation where he potentially exposing data, which is maybe not accurate. And as well, so as a kind of a second layer, the agent itself, and you saw that quite good, is like it always reflected in the first place to the experience topic, which is a kind of like also a memory function. So it realizes that we are still in that part of the conversation, and that's also something Salesforce stroked out as a kind of a key feature of that reasoning engine, that it has kind of two layers. So first is like a short-term memory. So even if like Chetan was poking around like again and again and again, but coming back to and providing the right details, it would realize, okay, we're back in that kind of experience topic, and then would continue with that kind of flow. So obviously within a real conversation, if you're providing, for example, like maybe not that kind of the good instruction from user perspective, so that the agent understands what you're talking about, it still can reflect them back to the information, which is the most appropriate one for finding the right actions. So this is like one of the benefits. And Salesforce Promise, and that's one thing where I'm really, really curious how it's working and how it turns out later on. There's also some kind of long-term memory related to it. There's not much information about it, how it will work. But I'm really curious how this turns out. So obviously you could imagine if you have thousands, 10,000 of users, potentially there's even some kind of learning and training aspects in terms of like, see, this is like the average way how an end user of an agent is like providing certain level of information. And this is like the way how the agent can learn from that kind of way how data is provided. But it's like just a guessing, and I'm really curious how that turns out. But obviously the first aspect is also very, very important, is like how to ensure and build up like the right security measurements. And I guess that's where I'm a little bit afraid right now, because it looks like very easy, especially within the trailhead and within the SDO. So what Salesforce is providing is like a kind of an almost just like with 3 clicks you get the first agents, but you already saw what Chetan was providing and showcasing. There are a lot of flows underneath. There are a lot of Apex classes which querying data, which needs to get or have like the appropriate configuration. So you need to ensure that everything is well defined in that regards, that you don't open up like certain guardrails you potentially define, so that you accidentally exposing data, customer data.
Yep,
But
and absolutely, and I think that's the point about, be very clear about, what you write as part of the instructions. Even more importantly, what you write as part of the, description, because based on that, the topic gets picked or not in the context of the conversation and the scope. All of those things are super important, and not something that, in the past where you would think about, something like this is just something that developers can write on their own. And we know how developers can be creative, how much they can or cannot think on such scenarios. Yeah.
yeah, it's especially applicable, I think, for agents that are public facing, like an agent that you publish on a website, for instance, as a service agent for unauthenticated users, like not in Experience Cloud, for instance, but really on your website directly. Because, for instance, if you only need to know an email address and maybe not a membership number, but a phone number or an address line or a zip code, for instance, like you also have with real agents now, that you call them, and of course they know the phone number you're calling from, and then they ask you maybe one validation question, but sometimes it's quite easy with a little social engineering to get that information, and then you could potentially request data from other users or even modify data from other users that you want to change the address, for instance, that you say, okay, I no longer live at that address and now I live at this address, and then an order might be shipped to you instead of the real client. So it does sound like a risk to me. I was also mentioned, was recently at the Heart of Service Summit in Breda, and also in the keynote, which featured Ed Thompson and Susan Emerson, also from Salesforce. They also mentioned that right now there are many CISOs globally really hitting the brake, like, hey guys, all fun and games, really looks amazing what we can do with this, but let's first think about the risk and the security and the privacy and all those other compliance we have to deal with before we open up everything. Like, it's nice functionality, but can we deliver it securely?
I
Yeah, there's
absolutely
one.
agree. I think that's where, besides something that you have configured as the agent, imagine you've done the best you can think of in terms of coming up with the best description, the scope, the instructions, and the actions. And you talk about the attack, vector in terms of, okay, you if you don't do a proper, validation in terms of, okay, provide me something that you can only expect a proper real person to know and be able to answer. Those are all externals. But think about also where, the problem, the Achilles heel of many companies in terms of the bad data. What if the email address that I provided ends up on 2 or 3 or more records there? Which one does it show then? Then again, you need to be very clear in terms of, does it help this, or imagine, if you just ask them for a order ID and then as a backup safety security measure, you thought that asking for an email address was sufficient enough. But imagine those two don't sit together. The email address makes you get 3 records and then the order number doesn't match. Those are all data problems, right? Again, one of those biggest issues that people have to think about before they can, try and justify the use cases or the investment that they want to do with the Agentforce.
There's also like another aspect, Kit, you mentioned in terms of the security is like, and that's maybe one of the trade-offs. Kind of a little bit disappointed, fairly speaking, compared to the prompt builder. And if you're remembering how Salesforce introduced the AI capabilities in the last, let's say, 1.5, 2 years, then one critical aspect they always stroked out was like their trust layer and the capabilities there. So obviously there are features and agreements actually they have in place for zero retention. So the data is not stored on that LLM and it can't be used for training purposes. So obviously they're using external LLMs to actually get the job done, but they are not allowed to work actually with that kind of data, to keep it simple. And another aspect of the trust layer was for the prompt builder, for example, the feature which was called data masking. So Salesforce identified PII data, for example, and there was a lot of even like setup and tweaking capabilities where then the data was kind of scrambled, so that even like the LLM couldn't really realize, okay, this is like Christoph is asking, for example, something. It randomly added like John Doe, and then after the response came back, it actually demasked the information and put the right tone to it. And now with like Agentforce, they disabled that kind of feature based on performance and accuracy considerations. And I really hope that they potentially change it, because at least in the discussion we have with our customers, this is like one kind of very crucial aspect, because like zero retention policy is one thing, but obviously like data masking is like a totally kind of different layer in terms of like security than a zero retention policy.
So for all the Agentforce functionality, it really doesn't do any of that. So it doesn't do the data masking, it doesn't do zero attention, and it still trains the LLM.
Zero retention is still in place,
Okay.
but it's not doing data masking. If you using still like the old prompt builder, then of course it's using data masking, and you still can use that. But at least for now, data masking is not part of it. But on the other hand, we also need to be fair. It's a totally new feature. It comes with an own release cycle, so similar like Data Cloud. They're releasing almost like on a kind of a 2-3 week cadence. So it's totally decoupled from what we know as like the classic Salesforce release cycle with like 3 releases a year. They totally decoupled it, and there are tons of capabilities and features which are still on the roadmap for this year, which is kind of amazing. Obviously, as a partner, we sometimes getting access a little bit earlier and seeing what they have on the roadmap, and it's really impressive how much effort they put into that. But obviously, one trade-off right now is at least that the data masking is not available.
And the training as well then, because for the Atlas reasoning engine to improve itself, to learn also from earlier conversations, you would imagine that it does need to train itself based on the conversation it has had so far. So is it then training within the context of your own org, or is the training happening by simply training the model by Salesforce, so not by your own use of the Agentforce, but more that they keep improving the model itself?
This is, I guess, at least if you're asking me, one of those things where I'm still trying to figuring out what kind of or how LLMs getting used within the reasoning engine. So obviously, Salesforce is using multiple ones. OpenAI is one of them, but I still have some kind of question marks. For example, if Salesforce already is using not like an LLM, but their research team came up a couple of months ago with an which they call LAM, a large action model, which is more focusing on learning what kind of tools and capabilities or what kind of tools you actually can utilize for your workflows. So for example, like if I'm providing an appointment, it knows like, hey, okay, I need to utilize the calendar app, for example, and adding it to and providing specific information. And at least what I understand right now is like they are a little bit vague, at least right now, for the different kind of agents they are using and providing what and which kind of LLMs they're using. And this is like something, I guess, it will be more and more clearer over the next couple of weeks. But it's like a similar example, and maybe just to attach on that, Chetan, as we also had like a couple of discussions with our customers, like, is data cloud necessary? There was also like a lot of uncertainty, which obviously wasn't ideal. But at least now, if you're diving deeper into it, it's getting more and more clear.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in these kinds of use cases, if the data that you need for doing any of these actions, or the get contact, get order, change order, or these kinds of things that you need to act, the agent to do some action on, if all of that is within your org, you obviously don't need Data Cloud behind the scenes. Data Cloud is more if you want to do some more generic detailed things where you need to look at, a customer lifetime value, for example, and then based on that, you have an action which can see whether if a higher customer lifetime value needs to have this thing or versus something else, then it can do those kinds of actions. However, if the entire data that you need for the scope of that particular agent is within your core cloud, then obviously you don't need Data Cloud.
In the upskill search session, they also mentioned two other reasons for data cloud. One was the audit log, and the other was grounding on knowledge articles in Salesforce.
Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. So the audit log is something that is still only within Data Cloud. However, you have the yeah, that's the part, it's still not something that can be in the core for obvious reasons. Yes.
And there's one aspect. So I try to keep it simple for me in terms of explaining it. Is like, you potentially not need it, as Chetan explained it. But anyhow, sooner or later you need it. Even if you're doing like stuff like RAG. So you want to enhance the prompt you're actually using with your agent with, for example, unstructured data in various tons of use cases. That's obviously one use case, and there's a second one, maybe more related to monitoring. I mean, obviously, if you're turning on a feature like Agentforce, obviously you want to do monitoring and fine tuning afterwards, like with multiple iterations and cycles, and seeing if like everything is working. And those kind of monitoring data, there's a tiny checkbox you can hit, but that more or less enforces you to have Data Cloud because the data is directly dumped off into the Data Cloud itself. So the answer is yes, you don't need it, but yes, you need it somehow. Yeah. I mean, it's like, if you're asking me personally, I'm getting more and more the impression that Data Cloud in the next, let's say, 3 up to 5 years will be like the place where you have like, or where all the data resists, and then you have like maybe different kind of UI layers on top of that, like what we know right now still as a core cloud, sales cloud, service cloud, or any kind of other functionality, but really distinguish this kind of like how data is actually stored and how it's getting actually accessed. That is more and more, or there is more and more change in that regards. And obviously that has also like some kind of implication on the pricing. I mean, we're now talking already kind of 45 minutes, and we didn't talk once about like the famous $2.
Yeah, it's another point, right? It's like we need to understand the viability, not just from a technical perspective, like does it provide value in the sense that it can do the same work as humans can, but can it also do it in a way that it provides return on investment compared to those human agents? So I think there it really depends on the use case. Like I actually did a calculation recently, like for let's say you have a second tier support agent or a third tier support agent working on more complex cases, let's say hour per case on average. And if you have a full-time year, you're looking at 1,840 hours, at least in the Netherlands, roughly. Like if you say like 5 weeks of vacation days, 1 week maybe of bank holidays in total, so 46 left. It's 1,840 hours, so 1 hour per case, 1,840 cases. If you're let's say it's around 60K per year in total package cost for like for the employer, for the salary and benefits for the human agent, then you already have a bit of a comparison of what the cost per case is. And if you compare that then with Agentforce, like maybe even if you can only reduce it by half, instead of 1 hour per case, it's half an hour per case, then that's the difference in Agentforce cost. If it's €2 per $2 per conversation, is only twice the 1840, so 3680. So that's way less than half of the 60K that the employer is paying. So I think it really depends on the use case. But for first tier support can be very different if you have like only 3 or 4 minutes per case, like more of a phone support where it's really short questions, then it's might be roughly equal or even cheaper with human agents.
Yeah, I think it's to be honest, I think to begin with, it's a little bit of something that is new to the Salesforce itself, as in like, we're not used to
Yeah.
paying or, being billed in terms of, per invocation. And we've had those things in terms of, okay, you have this many um, limits and you can do these many things within a period of 24 hours, and then you can ask for extended limits and buy an extended license or something like this. But paying something for per invocation. So it's again that kind of a completely different way of approaching your use case and then thinking whether it makes sense to have like the way you explained. I think absolutely it makes sense for somebody to look at it and look at from how much am I investing in my existing workforce, and then how much can I cut down from it, rather than simply saying, okay, I have $2 per conversation, so how many conversations should I buy? Absolutely not the right way to go for it, right? Look at it from the perspective, if I can cut down some of the time needed from my human agents by having some of these simple low-hanging use cases where it's a back and forth, and I can imagine that the agent can only do these actions, and within that framework, there is a low risk but high value on return. Yeah, so then absolutely $2 is nothing for that.
Yeah.
Imagine how many conversations back and forth you're having. So it's not like, within a session, there is not so many of, so I think a lot of times people don't even understand what does that $2 per conversation mean. So it's not like you type
Yeah.
one message and that counts towards one conversation. No, it's the entire, conversation. So until you end the conversation by closing the session, or you said hi and then nothing happened, so that conversation still remains open for 24 hours, after which that's called out as, that's something that has been concluded implicitly. But within that, imagine how the depth of the messages, the conversation that can go in back and forth, and then the actions that the agent can do autonomously behind the scenes. I don't think $2 is too much of an ask in that scenario.
No, I think I agree. And then also with the Heart of Service Summit, they gave forward-looking demo, which is something they're currently piloting internally at Salesforce, but that's not in beta or GA yet, with a multimodal handover where you start with chat, like when, for instance, like for an agent deployed to a website, like we discussed earlier, and we have a chat-based conversation, and then at some point the user said like, "Oh, sorry, I have to leave because I have an appointment. I have to get in the car. Can you call me back in 10 minutes?" And then 10 minutes later, the agent calls him back on his phone, and he can continue the same conversation, switching from one channel to the other with the same agent, same conversation, and doesn't have to repeat anything because the agent already knows his phone number. So he doesn't have to revalidate or anything like that, and they continue right where they left off. But if that's still within the same $2 or €2, I say that's pretty fair price.
Yeah, I guess this is the interesting part is like how Salesforce is charging when like what is like the conversation ending part. And from an architecture perspective, this is kind of very crucial aspect. Imagine in terms of like we are kind of trained to build like composable solutions. And obviously with like that kind of pricing model, and imagine like they're saying, okay, the conversation is also ending when like the agent completed his job, however you want to evaluate that. Nevertheless, let's say that the conversation for the agent ends and the agent gets to the conclusion, okay, my job is done here, and I hand it over to another agent, like as in those kind of multi-agent scenarios, you potentially have that kind of issue. Is the customer now charged twice because it's like two conversations with agent A and then agent B? That would, at least from an architecture perspective, totally change how we need to think about composability. And this is something, again, still a little bit blurry because, as you mentioned, Kit, multi-agent is not there yet. But I guess this is something forward-looking statement, which I'm really curious about, is like how Salesforce envision that, because obviously you want to build those kind of agents very composable to really have the capability also to fine-tune them as good as possible. And if like underlying business process is changing, you don't want to change like, I wouldn't call it monolith agent, but you know what I mean, like very complex agents, where you potentially just want to tweak just like tiny process.
Yeah, and top also, of course, the data cloud aspect, right? So earlier you mentioned like, okay, the real hard requirements for data clouds may be quite narrow, but if you actually look at achieving the real use cases, then in many more situations you actually will want to use data cloud, but that's also consumption based. So it also come on top. So how would that scale then?
Yeah, no, I mean it's hard to um think of it in terms of a short-term fix, but that's something where it needs to have a long-term strategy behind it. Of course, an agent is looking at some specific information, like for example, the unstructured data that you mentioned, Chris. I think it's a very good example in that sense. Like, does it have to do for every single conversation on the fly, and for that, does it need to consume some very specific data cloud credits? Then of course we are looking at a very different type of a conversation, and does it even justify having something completely autonomous in this scenario? And but otherwise, at least for some of the kind of conversations where you just need to look at some of the data which is already so solved and stored somewhere within the data cloud, and then you just need to access that data, then I think we are looking at a different conversation, because in those scenarios, those data cloud credits are not consumed just for this one particular conversation. If you're doing a customer lifetime value calculations, calculated insights or something like that, it's there. One or maybe even more agents can access it, and it's not something that is attached to a very single one session. And therefore, you're paying for every conversation, not just two plus something else. It's a different calculation there.
Yeah, I guess this is like overall speaking, very interesting times for us architects, because it's like maybe one of those really impactful changes for the whole platform, and how we need to potentially rethink our architecture approaches at certain clients. And that makes it very, very interesting, because like there's something really new, fresh out of the oven, where we also need to adjust maybe almost on a kind of a frequent basis our approach. Are we still on the right track? Is that really scalable? Because as Chetan mentioned, it's like for us within the Salesforce ecosystem, models which are based on kind of consumption, or pricing which is based on consumption, this actually wasn't really the case for the Salesforce ecosystem, besides some kind of parts within the marketing cloud and some other areas. But for most of the core functionalities, you didn't have those kind of things, or they were rather easy to predict. And now we're getting to a point where there's a lot of uncertainty, and where also like the experience is missing on the customer side as well as on our architect side, and where we now need to get slowly hands-on experience and knowledge, and applying that knowledge in terms of like how you get the most value out of it.
But do you think there are also the expectations from all parties are aligned? Because, for instance, sales is pushing really hard for having 1,000 Agentforce clients globally by the end of the year. Of course, in Capgemini, you also see a big push on AI, Gen AI, agentic workflows in general, not just for Salesforce. clients are very curious about it, but is it all already on the same page, basically? Like, can we deliver this? Or is it still more of a POC phase where you have to experiment and get the experience first, get that hands-on feeling before we can use it in a production use case?
I guess what is looking for me, and sorry that I jumped in, Chetan. Um, I definitely see a lot of potential, as I see across all the kind of industries with our customers that there are real use cases. And it's not like a very theoretical use case. There are really use cases for features and functionalities of or where Agentforce can shine. So I'm pretty confident about that. But obviously, there's a lot of things we need to explore. And the good thing is also on the customer side, I see a strong acknowledgement that that kind of explorative phase is still there, and that they are willing to do so because everybody sees the kind of value, what kind of or what agents can deliver. So I'm pretty confident about that. Obviously, as we are really in the beginning of that kind of product which and service Salesforce was offering, we also need to acknowledge there is still a lot of features and capabilities Salesforce also need to deliver to make it a really sustainable product. Certain aspects, similar like Data Cloud and some other capabilities. So, which Salesforce were providing, taking Data Cloud as an example, with like the sandboxes. Obviously, within an enterprise scale, having a system or having a new capability which don't provide sandbox capabilities is hard to introduce. But Salesforce finally addressed that, and similar it will turn out for Agentforce that at some parts and areas they need to tighten up the screws. But with the manpower and with the release cycle I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty confident that the issues will get tackled.
Yeah. And I think we briefly touched upon that in the big at the start of like there are some very genuine use cases and there is some very genuine interest from the customers that we are speaking to who do feel that there are some places where they definitely see a benefit of it. How um, well that technology is suited for those kinds of use cases, of course, that's up to us to help them understand and see the value behind it, not just architects, but even the business people who can actually see the live results with them figuring it out. So it's not something that happens somewhere up in the clouds and no real user can see or touch and interact and feel what is it that this particular capability is doing. It's very user facing and in that sense, yeah.
And you mentioned though that also has quite a large impact on the user experience and also the customer experience, like the customers of our clients. Like for now, it may make sense to really mimic the human agent workflows in Agentforce, but at some point it might make more sense to really adapt it to the capabilities of Agentforce. Like they are not humans, they're the AI agents, they're LM-based agents, so we can have a completely different way of working with a different interaction with them. How do you envision that?
Yeah, no, I think it probably also is something that has to be seen and developed over the period, right? Because in the way that when I was like, I showed you what I was just trying to do, and the way I was trying to play around with it, it didn't really seem any different from as if I was interacting with an actual human, where except for one or two prompts where I said, and it gave me the exact same answer in those two. You would expect that a human, there is an emotion, and then there is this part where, the human gets annoyed and gives a different answer. However, the agent is much more efficient in that sense, right? So there is that part where it seems very, very realistic, hard to even differentiate whether it was a human or an agent I was chatting with.
Just a lot more patient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's also a nice thing that you can, like another use case, even if it's maybe not directly cost efficient in comparison to your human agents, you can provide additional services. Like if you, for instance, now have only a call center uh, in one particular location and you provide only with one shift, so 8 hours a day, then with Agentforce, of course, it's very easy to upskill to 24/7 support, at least for the part where you don't need a handover to a human agent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, you're right, Kit and Chetan. There are, I guess, tons of use cases and things where we potentially seen from a purely business perspective, it change how we envision how we're dealing with workforce, and potentially we can't even really imagine right now how AI will still change our way how we are working, how we approaching certain things, and obviously transparency is a huge aspect of it. And yeah, so really looking forward how this change will reflect with that kind of tooling capability. But based on the last 6-8 weeks, at least what I observed is like it seems to be really promising as a kind of a capability what Salesforce built there in the last couple of months and obviously years. So I'm really looking forward how Agentforce will change the underlying Salesforce structure.
Fully agree. Right then.
All right, then shall we wrap it up here?
Yep, before we finally got replaced by an agent.
Sounds good.
Which providing way more accurate answers than we do.
Who knows? Well, maybe in a few months. Well, luckily they don't have full language support yet, so at least in the Netherlands we still have some value with Dutch. But in Germany though, you are already getting fully replaced.
Yep, we get it sooner than later.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chetan. Really, insightful.